Good afternoon. It's good to see all of you. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Will Hanstein. I'm the director for what used to be the East Tennessee School of Preaching and Missions. And I guess for about, 12 years or so now has been called the Southeast Institute of Biblical Studies. We're the same great place, just a different name. But I do want to start out by saying how much I appreciate all that you have done for the school for a long time, longer than I've been there, for sure. I appreciate your support and your encouragement of the preaching students, and appreciate, it's nice for Jenny and me, and my kids didn't get to come tonight, but for them too, when we come down here, you guys are just very friendly. And you make us feel at home, and I appreciate that very much. And I appreciate the invitation to speak tonight. And if you'll turn to Acts chapter 20, I am going to stick to the subject that I was assigned tonight. When I was introduced, it was said that I would speak on evangelism or anything I deem fit. Well, typically, if people ask me to speak and they give me an assignment, I try to stick to that assignment. And so I was told to speak on evangelism and specifically Paul. So at least if I understood it correctly, and if I didn't, we're going to speak on evangelism and Paul tonight regardless. But if you'll turn to Acts chapter 20, one of the, and this is, I was told this is a Bible class, and so I'm going to treat it like a Bible class. So if I ask a question, or if I ask someone to read, for a volunteer to read, I'm just going to stand here until somebody, gives me an answer or does something. But so feel free to raise your hand or just shout out a question or a comment if you've got a good point to make that relates to what we're talking about tonight. But what does the word apathy mean? You don't care. That's about as good a definition, I think, as you'd find. It means you don't care. Now, it doesn't mean you hate somebody or you hate whatever it is, whatever the subject is. But you don't like it either. You just don't care. You don't think about it. And I think one of the greatest problems that we have in the church is apathy toward lost people. It's not that we hate lost people, because I don't think anybody here, and that reminds me, before my Taylor Swift ringtone goes off, I'm going to make sure my phone's on silent. I don't even know if that's Taylor Swift. I have no clue who that is. But that's about the only pop culture icon I can name. But anyway, and that's just because every time I would turn on a football game, she was sort of thrust into the football conversation because she happened to be dating a Kansas City Chief player. And anyway, I won't rant about how it sort of ruined my football experience. But anyway, I think we're apathetic a lot of times. It's not that we don't, it's not that we hate the lost, and we probably like them as people for the most part.
I don't think it's that we don't care. I think it's that it's not really of any concern to us, maybe.
Yeah.
Because we do care.
Right. I think I see your point, and I think that's a good one. We'd rather them go to heaven. We'd like them to go to heaven, but we're not concerned enough to do anything about it, really. We're not concerned enough to take a risk. I compare, just from an illustration standpoint, a lot of times. I compare, I ate right before I came here, which is a big no-no when you're trying to speak, so I may take some pregnant pauses occasionally. But, it's not that we don't want them to go to heaven per se. It's just we're not interested enough to take any kind of risk. And I compare evangelism a lot to asking somebody out on a date, if you're a guy anyway, because there's risk involved. And you're, at least maybe some of you were much bolder than I was, but there's this sort of thought process that at least I went through where, okay, is she interested in me? If I ask her out on a date, what's the chance of success? And what's the chance that she'll say no so firmly that it'll be an embarrassment that I can never recover from for the rest of my life, and I'll have to move to a desert island or something because of the shame? That kind of thing that goes on in the mind of a teenage young man, or even a man in his early 20s. But see, if you like a girl enough, you always end up taking that risk. You always are, the reward in your mind outweighs the risk. And when it comes to evangelism, what's often our problem? Rejection. In our mind, as we do the same kind of mental thought process, a lot of times, and we may not phrase it this way, but the risk of rejection outweighs the potential reward of bringing them to Christ. In other words, the shame we might, at least as we may view it, the shame we might have to endure because we ask them if they'd like to come to church with us, or if they'd like a Bible study, or even if we just ask the question, have you ever thought about spiritual things? You know, the shame that we, or the nervousness we might be concerned about, a lot of times outweighs if I don't say anything, then this person may very well not go to heaven. I may be the only person this person ever knows who could even give the truth to them, which is, a lot of times it's worse than with our family or even with our friends, because, well, why is it worse? A lot of times.
It's a stronger connection that you fear will be broken.
Right. Don't want to mess that up. I mean, this is a good friend of mine. He's been a friend of mine for 20 years. Or this is my neighbor. If I mess that up, I got to live next to this person, and what are they going to say? And so there's all these thoughts, if you will, that run through our mind. And so there's this kind of apathy, because in a sense, oftentimes we don't care enough to tell somebody. And I would state this. An individual or a congregation is great only in proportion to their concern for the lost. Something that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks several years ago was this fact. Christians are on this earth for one reason. The Lord hasn't returned yet. He's postponed or tarried in his returning, may be a better way to phrase it. He's tarried or waited in his returning for one reason. And what's that reason? To bring the lost to him, to seek and save that which is lost. 2 Peter chapter 3 says, not wanting any to perish. The Lord's not slow as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wanting any to perish, but for all to come to repentance. See, we need to worship. We're supposed to worship God on this earth, but we can worship him in heaven, right? So he's not waiting around because, hey, there's more worship that Christians need to do before they go to heaven. We need to fellowship while we're here, but we can fellowship in heaven. We're going to do that for eternity. So God's not waiting around because, hey, those Christians just need some more fellowship time before I bring them to heaven. God's waiting around because he's saying, you know what, there's a lot of lost people out there. And so the one reason why Christians are still here, the only reason why you and I are still here, if you're a Christian, is because there's lost people we're supposed to go talk to. And that really hit me like a ton of bricks and really showed me how important it was that I do whatever I can. And by the way, I'm not standing before you as a guy who's always done as much or even what he should have done in a number of situations. I look back over the course of my life and, boy, I wish I would have just said something this time, or what if I would have done this or that? So, if this isn't me preaching at you, so to speak, it's just me having a discussion about what we can all do. So if I could get somebody to read Acts chapter 20, verses 18 through 21, please. Acts chapter 20, verses 18 through 21.
And when they had come to him, he said to them, You know from the first day that I came to Asia, in what manner I always lived among you, serving the Lord with all humility, with many tears and trials which happened to me, by the plotting of the Jews, how I kept back nothing that was helpful, but proclaimed it to you, and taught you publicly and from house to house, testifying to Jews and also to Greeks, repentance toward God and faith toward our Lord Jesus Christ.
Okay, so there's 3 points I want to look at where Paul talks about his ministry, essentially his approach to evangelism, that I think should be our approach to evangelism. And if you look at this very first phrase in verse 19, we get, first of all, the basis of Paul's concern for the lost. What was the foundation of it all? Why was he so concerned for the lost? And so somebody just looked at, what's that first phrase? Really, probably the first word in your translation in verse 19. Serving. Serving whom? The Lord. Now, he's going around doing all this work, bringing people to Christ, but at the end of the day, who's he serving? The Lord. And how is that serving the Lord? How is Paul talking to other people about Jesus and imploring them to come to Christ? How is that serving the Lord? He's carrying out the Great Commission. The Lord's his boss, and that's what his boss told him to do. And when you obey your boss, you're serving your boss. You may be a janitor, so to speak, and you may be, or a waitress or something like that, and you may be serving 100 other people or 1,000 other people by what you do, literally serving them. But at the end of the day, you're serving your boss, because he's the one that gave you the assignment. He's the one that gave you the job to do. And the reason why Paul was so concerned for the lost at the end of the day is because Jesus told him to be concerned for the lost. And in Acts chapter 20 and verse 8, beginning in verse 18, Paul's having this farewell conversation with the elders at Ephesus. And he had spent a lot of time in Ephesus. He had gone through a lot in Ephesus. In fact, if you go back to Acts chapter 19 and verse 1, if you read that, Acts chapter 19, okay, yeah, it sounds kind of like a hard time, but at least my reading of it, it doesn't sound like a really hard time. But then when you read 2 Corinthians, especially chapter 1, and he's writing 2 Corinthians shortly after he got done with his work in Ephesus. But he talks about how he was in a situation where he was so sure that he was going to die that he just was ready to have it happen. In other words, there's no way out. It's going to happen. And so he just had accepted that fact. And he even calls it a miracle in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, if you will, a miracle of sorts where he says God raised him from the dead. Now he's speaking figuratively. God didn't literally raise him from the dead, but he was so certain he was going to die, God getting him out of that situation was like he was raised from the dead. And so Paul's speaking to this eldership, that they've been through a lot together. They have been through a lot together, and he's giving them what he thinks is his sort of a farewell address. This is the last time he thinks he's going to see them. But at the end of the day, he says in verse 18, "You know yourselves from the first day that I set foot in Asia," that's Ephesus, "how I was with you the whole time." And what was I doing? Serving the Lord. That's what this is all about. That's the first thing he says. I was serving the Lord. We don't have a ton of time to go through everything I've got, but we can look in 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 19, where Paul says, "For though I am free from all men, I've made myself a" what? A slave to all, or a servant, if you will, that I might win the more. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9, I do everything I can to bring somebody to the gospel. If they like it, if they don't like it, if it's going to make them happy, whatever's going to influence them, whatever I can legitimately change in my life, I'm going to do it, if that's going to bring them to Christ. And he was willing to serve in any capacity. You know, a lot of times we may just want to do it our way, or this is the role I'm going to play. Well, Paul was ready to be the planter, so to speak. He was ready to be the waterer. He was ready to be the cultivator, the reaper. He would lay the foundation. He'd build the superstructure. If it would help somebody go to heaven, he'd mop the floor. He didn't have to be the head guy. He didn't have to be the guy that did the one-on-one Bible study, even though maybe that's what he did most of the time. But we need to have that same kind of concept of servanthood or service to God if we want to be good soul winners. Could somebody read Matthew 20 and verse 28 for me, please?
Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and give his life a ransom.
What did Jesus do when he was on this earth? What was his whole ministry about at the end of the day? Serving. I mean, the whole reason he came here was to serve mankind in what capacity? Pardon? Savior. I mean, he came to serve us by dying on the cross, ultimately. I mean, everything about his ministry was serving. He didn't come down here and start bossing people around. He didn't come down here and have people wait on him hand and foot or anything, even though he's a king. He's the creator of all things. And yet he served us. And so that's the example we need to follow. And so we sing a song called Rescue the Perishing. You guys, I don't know if you sing it around here. I haven't heard it in a while. But rescue the perishing, care for the dying, snatch them in pity from sin and the grave, and so on and so forth. We need to get it in our minds that the one reason we're here is to serve God. And we don't necessarily serve God by doing nice things. It's good to do nice things, but ultimately everything this church does should have some kind of evangelistic component to it, if that makes sense. I mean, the worship service, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, for as long as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you do what? Pardon? Show forth the Lord's death. My version says, proclaim the Lord's death. The Lord's Supper is an act of worship to God. That's true. It's where we commune with Jesus and with other Christians. But it's a proclamation that Jesus died to save mankind. And every week, that makes a statement. And so if there's a non-Christian in the worship service, there's an evangelistic element to the worship service, is there not? Because the non-Christian's either thinking in his mind or asking you or me, why do we do this? What are you doing this for? What's with the cracker? What's with the grape juice? But that's evangelism. Why is the church benevolent? Because when we're dealing with eternity, does it really matter if somebody has lunch? And I'm not trying to be callous. I'm just trying to make a point. Does it really matter if somebody has lunch on Tuesday or tomorrow or not? I mean, if they skip lunch tomorrow in the grand scheme of eternity, is that really a big deal? So is the church to be benevolent because because people are hungry physically?
No, my mom always said, you cannot teach someone when their stomach is growling louder than you can speak.
Yeah, well, and that's a good thing to say and to keep in mind. We do that not because they're physically hungry. We do that because we're trying to show them who we represent. We're trying to show them Jesus. By serving them, we're serving the Lord because we want our act of kindness to have them ask or think, why is he doing this? Why is she doing this? And sometimes, and you may have experienced the same thing, sometimes in being kind, I've had people just flat out ask me, why are you being so nice to me? They've had a rough life or whatever, and they may just, why are you being so nice to me? Because nobody's ever been nice to them like that before. And to me, it may be like, well, who wouldn't do something like this? But see, by doing that, they're seeing, hopefully at least, it's sparking an interest in what you have to say. And it may spark it immediately. It may spark it way down the line. It may never spark it. They may never care to even broach the subject. But it's so important to be a servant. Yes, ma'am, and then Brother Cool.
I think the big thing is just continuously reminding ourselves that, yeah, we know how valuable we are to the Lord as Christians, but that person who's lost is just as valuable. And a lot of times we don't quite understand that because they're lost, because in our mind they are lost, but they're just as valuable to God as we are.
Mm-hmm. That's right. They are just as valuable to God as we are. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I thought of this phrase today because I was reminded of, I wrote a letter to a patient once that was going through, this is 15 years ago, that I was reminded of today about her mom. I just wrote a letter and tried to encourage a teenager that was going through a tough time. Here I am 15 years later being told by the mom about it. And it brought up a phrase that I try to remember, and I fail so much, but predictability is inversely proportional to impact. If you live a good, nice Christian life, on America's terms, your impact is pretty low. But if you do something unpredictable, in other words, you go that little extra mile, and your impact is great. When your predictability is low, your impact is inversely proportional. The more unpredictable you are, the greater your impact will be. Yeah. And I just, try to remind myself of that. And today hit me because I don't remember writing this girl a note, but the mom remembers it 15 years later. I mean, you don't realize just what little acts of kindness that are just a little bit above the expected, the impact it can have.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just little things. And a lot of times we equate evangelism with, do I have the ability to sit down with somebody and answer all these hard questions about the Bible and about, the existence of God and all this stuff. And, for most of us, we come away from that thinking, boy, I can't do that. I don't know all those answers. I can't quote all these verses from memory, and and we kind of psych ourselves out, if that's still a phrase people use, but we psych ourselves out of thinking that we can do evangelism at all. And a lot of times, evangelism is just simply doing something kind with the idea in our head, here's why I'm doing it. My wife, just to sort of, extol her virtues, she probably isn't going to like me for saying this, but I've never met somebody like her. My mom's, in many respects, the same way. Everything. Like, their mind always has evangelism on it. And some people are better at certain aspects of it. I'm not very good, at least at this aspect of it, but my wife can be at Target and start talking to somebody else who's looking at something on the same rack, and I'm standing there wishing we could go because I've been bored since about 15 minutes before we even started the drive to Target, and she's talking about, this would look cute on you or something like that, whatever she says, and then next thing I know, I come back to consciousness, so to speak, and they're talking about Jesus. I don't have that same talent, if you will, but or at least I don't have it to the same degree. And we're all going to have different talents and have them to differing degrees and things like that. But see, sometimes it's just simply being at the right place at the right time. Sometimes, even though it's me, I've still... I remember one time thinking, I don't know what I'm going to say to this person. I don't know what I'm going to say. And then I thought, you know what? I'm just going to ask him. Are you interested in studying the Bible? I'm just going to ask. And I'll use this illustration, and I don't want to get bogged down on this any more than we already have maybe, but when I was a freshman in college, it was the second semester, I'm like, I don't understand why I'm not getting any dates. All these other guys are getting dates. And then it occurred to me, I hadn't asked anybody out. And it just kind of like a bolt of lightning. It's like, well, if you want dates, you actually have to ask people out. That's kind of how it works. And it's the same with evangelism. So years later, I'm, okay, how do I broach this? How do I do this? And I'm overthinking the whole thing. Because at the end of the day, if I wanted to go out on a date with a girl, it's a lot of times it's as simple as saying, hey, would you like to go to dinner? Because either she's already decided if she wants to go out to dinner with you or not, kind of a thing. Well, it's same with this. And I'm just going to ask him. So I said, and it was actually one of my son's friends who wasn't a Christian. And I was worried that, well, if I say the wrong thing, then maybe that's going to ruin his friendship with my son and, all this kind of stuff. And I don't want to embarrass my son and be the dorky dad or whatever. And so I was just overthinking it. And I was talking to my son and it just, I'm just going to ask him. And I said, Sam and I are studying the Bible, which was true. Would you like to join us for the study? And he said, 5 seconds in, he said, yeah, I'd like that. And I don't know, a few months later, 6 months later, after some, we'd go a few weeks, and then there might be a few weeks between studies and stuff. Anyway, the young man's a Christian. The young man's come to leadership camp. The young man's spoken, delivered sermonettes. This is a young man who is in a single-parent home. His mom's raising him. Primarily, he sees his dad for about a week a year. Did I do anything profound? No. I didn't do anything that anybody else in this room couldn't have done. And you know what, we studied? Because you have to be a genius to use the methodology I used, right? Once we got the study, we sat down and we just went through these pre-prepared personal Bible study books. Anybody in this room can do that. But I've kind of blended really my first 2 points, but it's the basis of Paul's concept of evangelism was he's serving the Lord. And the second point I have was here's how he did it. And if you look at verse 19 again of Acts chapter 20, he says he's serving the Lord, but then he says how he was doing it. With all humility. The best evangelists are the ones who aren't doing it for, if you will, so they can be known as this great evangelist. They just see one person at a time. Just one person at a time. And they're just doing all they can. They don't think they're great. They don't think they're big people or whatever. They understand that they're in the same situation that this person, or they used to be in the same situation as this person was in. If it wasn't for God's grace, then they wouldn't be saved. And so they don't deserve salvation any more than the person they're trying to study with. If you look again at verse 19, I've got to pick it up because we spent too much time on the other. But he served with all humility and with tears. When Paul, why would Paul's evangelism involve tears? I'm sorry? Some won't listen. Which tells you what? He actually cares about the people. See, that's part of it too. That goes back to the apathy or the lack of concern that we sometimes have. He actually cares about people. Yes, sir.
I think he probably has a regret, too, of what his past life was and how he could have brought those people to Christ if he would have began his Christian walk sooner.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right there because, he calls himself the least of all saints, and I don't think he's, trying to, reach for oh no, Paul, you're really great. I don't think it's that. He really believes it. And why does he call himself the least of all the saints? He'd done damage. You can't get any worse than trying to destroy the kingdom of God. That's about the worst thing you can ever try to do. Now, God forgave him of it, and I'm not looking down my nose at Paul by any stretch. But in Paul's mind, like you said, or in the back of it, he's thinking, look at all the time I lost. Look at all the damage I did and all that I have to make up for. And, Paul worked harder probably than anybody ever has outside of Jesus Christ for the Lord's kingdom, certainly harder than I work. That's for sure.
Part of that, the tears and all that, is he has a sense of urgency. He knows his time is about to be up, and I think sometimes maybe our challenge is we think we have all the time in the world.
Yeah.
And to go back to your dating analogy, if that girl that you're interested in, if you know that she's about to transfer out in a few days, well, then all of a sudden there's an urgency. Like,
right.
I got 3 days left, or I got a week left, I got to make my move now.
That's right.
Out. But I think we just kind of think, whether it's friends or family or whatever, we just kind of think, someday I'll get to that, and we'll work on this over a period of decades or whatever. And Paul's like, no, you gotta get after it. You gotta have a sense of urgency because we don't know when the Lord's going to return, and we don't know how long that person has.
Yeah. Well, whenever we say, well, I'll get to it tomorrow, typically tomorrow never comes. And it's one thing if we try and then we say, okay, I need to wait a little bit to try again. That's one thing. But if we just put off trying in the first place, typically, at least in my case, I'll just keep it with me, trying, it just never turns about or comes about. Paul, if you look back in Acts 19 and verse 2, he probably was grieved or brought to tears by the ignorance that he saw in Ephesus. And we look in this community, and it's just people who should know or could know about Jesus, just they don't know about Jesus. They don't know about the nature of the kingdom. There's so many people who think they are saved, and they have no clue that they're not saved. And so they're not even looking. They're not even trying to figure out how to be saved because they think they already are saved. If you look in Acts 19 and verse 9, you see the blasphemy, if you will, on the part of the Jews. People who should have known who Jesus is, and yet they don't. Idolatry in Acts 19 and verse 28. There have been places I've been, and this always hits me. I've been in a lot of cathedrals, old churches in the Northeast and even in Europe and things like that, beautiful buildings. But whenever I see them or go inside or whatever, it just hits me really hard that it's almost idolatrous. It's just all this sin and all the people who have been led astray by these worldwide churches. And when we think of sin and what it does to people now, you turn on the news and just you see the effects of sin. And it's heartbreaking. You see what it does to children who can't do anything about it. And then you think, here's what it does in eternity. And it's heartbreaking. And, what do? Well, you do the best you can, but you do something. He talks in verse 19 about how he evangelized, if you will, or worked in Ephesus through trying service or through trials. He went through a lot in Ephesus, and if we had time, we could read Acts 19. But then at the end of the day, it was rewarding service. I don't know how many people you all dated, if you will, or that kind of thing, but for all the people you or I dated when we were younger, and then you had the breakup, right? No, that's the worst thing in the world, and your heart's shattered. He or she loved somebody else or didn't want to be with you or whatever. Or maybe it's just hard on you because you really liked the person at one time, and then you fell out of love, whatever it is, and you keep going through that. And then if you find that one person that you do end up marrying, it makes it all worth it, right? There's the reward. And you don't really think about all those difficult times anymore that you had in those other relationships. Well, the same's true in evangelism. Most people that you try to bring to Christ are going to say what, essentially? No. But when you get the one person that you bring to Christ, boy, that feels so good. And you're like, I want to do this again. And it's not that you forget all the people that you encouraged to think about Jesus and who said no, but it makes it worth it, if you will. And Paul went through all of the things that he went through because to get the one, it was worth it. And the interesting thing is, it doesn't just stop at one. There's always plenty of people to evangelize. So here's, in the few minutes we have left, what are some of the ways Paul evangelized? I'm skipping through like oodles of material that I had that, yes, sir.
One of the, when we read it, it kind of struck me. He
Right.
And it's not, and I'm trying to make it not about door knocking. It's about getting involved with somebody, on a personal level, sharing a meal. And sometimes I struggle because I like my personal time.
Mm-hmm.
And if I want to have sacrificial love, I'm going to sacrifice my personal time and get involved with somebody.
Right.
And even if I do have an ulterior motive all behind it.
Yeah.
Joining a club that maybe opens the door, just house to house.
Right. This is one way to evangelize. Standing behind that thing and preaching to a group, or this thing and preaching to a group of people, that's one way. But the house to house. And one thing that's opened my eyes is there's evangelistic opportunities everywhere. You go to the grocery store, there's an evangelistic opportunity. Because think of it this way. Now, I had to have somebody open my eyes to this too, because I'm an introverted person and I'm not the biggest conversationalist you'll ever meet in your life and that kind of thing. But the cashier at the checkout stand says, "Hi, how are you doing today?" Now, she's probably just saying it because that's her canned speech to, or question to everybody that comes there, and they say fine, and they may even say, "How are you?" and she says fine back, and then that'll be, $87.50 please, or something along those lines. But think of it this way. "Hi, how are you doing?" "I'm doing great. How are you?" "I'm doing okay." "You having a good day?" "It's okay." "How's your day?" "Well, my day's great. There's a VBS that I'm doing down at the Eastside church tonight. And, I'm really excited about that." Well, if that's where the conversation ends, guess what? There's a little bit of a seed planted. But she might say, "Oh, what's that?" She might, "What's a VBS?" She might say, "Where's the Eastside church?" She might say, "What are you doing for it?" But all of a sudden, now maybe there's a door open. In fact, I remember one time, and it may have been VBS, but it's been a few years, but we stopped and ate at some 50s diner thing that's around here. Got to talking, my wife got to talking to our waitress. Next thing I know, I'm trying to eat my cheeseburger, and I'm nervous because we got to get here, Jenny, because I got to speak and all this kind of stuff. She's telling the waitress about the Eastside Church of Christ and how it's a great church and how she needs to come visit and so on and so forth. And I don't know if she ever did. I believe we told Wayne about it that night. But she's good at this, much better than I am. But there's things that you can do. And you may think to yourself, but what if they ask me some hard Bible question? Well, here's the beauty of it all. You don't have to know the answer. If somebody asks me a hard question, you know what I say? "Well, that's a good question. I don't know. But I can go look it up, or I can try and figure it out, or whatever." You can say the same thing. I don't expect anybody I talk to know everything about the Bible. I certainly don't know everything about the Bible. Nobody in this room does. And generally the people I talk to don't expect me to know everything. And so if there's a question that I don't know the answer to, I just say I don't know the answer to it. And everybody I've ever talked to has accepted that fact. Now, that didn't mean they've become a Christian, but that didn't cause the study or any potential for the future to end. What I've found is most of the time when I'm trying to bring somebody to Christ, if I can just do something and we can go, if I can get them to take maybe just one step closer to Jesus, that may be all I can do in that situation. But every single time, if that's all I can do, I know other people who I can say, "Hey, here's the situation. Here's what I've done so far. Here's where this person's at. I need you to come and fill in the blank." And a lot of times that's, "Hey, Jenny, I talked to this person, but because I'm not a very good conversationalist, I don't know what to say next. Can you come with me the next time?" And and then I just go sit down somewhere and just let her take it. Sometimes when we did this, especially when we lived in Denver, she would organize these game nights, and she would invite we might invite a total of, say, 5 families. 3 of them were members of the church, 3 of those families. And then we'd invite 2 non-Christian families that we were trying to work on. Not for a nefarious purpose, but see, the church families were in on the whole thing, that we're just sitting here having a good time, but this is what we're gradually working toward. We're not trying to assault them with the gospel necessarily, but we're trying to take these steps. When you go to the gym, if you go to the gym, if you're walking in the park, if you're going to the store, if you're, going to the dentist, although the dentist here is a member of the church, but you go to the doctor. Well, same there. I'm running out of illustrations. But, everywhere you go, there's an opportunity maybe to say something about the church. Just plant this idea. And sometimes you might have somebody, like when there was a donut shop in Denver I would frequent. And I got to know the people so much that one of the employees was having trouble in her marriage. So I said, we've got some folks down at the church here who are really good in helping people work through marriages. The man who worked there, he never was interested in studying the Bible with me, but he said, hey, when you have more gospel meetings or VBSs or whatever the church is doing, give me a flyer so I can hang it up, because he just liked us. But it's because I built a relationship. So anyway, I'm out of time, and sorry we didn't get to nearly all the things that I wanted to, but hopefully that helps you see you can do it. You can be an evangelist. You may not be able to do everything, but you can do something. And just approach every day. Who am I going to talk to today about Jesus? What am I going to do to try and just get 1 inch closer, or help somebody get 1 inch closer to Jesus? So, thank you.